Good morning, everyone. And we're very thankful all the weather forecasters were wrong, and we're glad that you were able to get here for a very important day, the day where we will be filing House Bill 492, which we will dub the Ellen Gregory Robb legislation. And certainly this bill is going to give our PA crime victims the voice that we so desperately fight for them having. I want to start off by introducing our guests that are here with us. Certainly everyone knows our great District Attorney, Risa Furman, who we've had many successes at this podium with legislation, and we're hoping that this podium is successful with this as well. We thank Risa for her support. Our State Attorney General, Kathleen Kane, has traveled down to be with us and fight with us for this. Certainly you know Gary Gregory, who has been here before. Our chairman of the PA Parole Board, Mike Pottinger, is here and will be speaking. We are awaiting Chairman Caltagirone from the Judiciary Committee who should be here. Representative Todd Stevens, Representative Topol, Representative Corbin, Representative Daly, Representative Lawrence, and the staff for Representative Bradford I know I see here, and they are in appropriation hearings in Harrisburg, and we thank Matt and everyone for their support. Representative Harper's here. I'm sorry, Kate. It had you were here and I didn't see you. I'm sorry. And we thank Representative Harper. It's important to note that the entire Montgomery County delegation is co-sponsors of this legislation. We're all in this together. We appreciate it. We also want to thank Pennsylvania FOP Representative Joe Regan. He's one of Montgomery County's own, but he's on the he's representing the state lodge here. We have Chief Medwood from Lower Salford. He's the incoming president of Chiefs of Police Association of Montgomery County. Chief Tom Nolan from Upper Merion Township Police, where this heinous crime occurred. Chief Toomey of Hatfield, which is our outgoing Chief of Police President. We have Beth Sturman from Laurel House, Mary Onama from Montgomery County Victim Service Center. And I don't believe our victim advocate has made it, but she is very... Carol, I am so sorry. Good to see you. We just met. So we're very thankful that you made it here today. I just want to also list the groups that support this legislation, and then we'll get briefly into legislation. Obviously, our Attorney General. This bill was introduced to our membership in the last 2 weeks to look at, and we are now at 53 members co-sponsoring this legislation, a heavy bipartisan bill, which is very helpful. Our PA District Attorneys Association, our Pennsylvania State Police, our Pennsylvania Chiefs of Police Association, our PA Fraternal Order of Police, our PA State Troopers Association, our PA Board of Probation and Parole, our Montgomery County Chiefs of Police Association, our PA Board of Probation and Parole, our County Chief Adult Probation and Parole Officers of Pennsylvania, certainly our friends of Ellen, who couldn't make it today, everygreatreason.org, a coalition of PA crime victims, Victim Service Center of Montgomery County, and Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. That is as of yesterday, as of 4:30. Obviously, it's important that each one of these groups has their day of recognition, and we thank them so much for their support. Obviously, House Bill 492, for most of you, you know why it came to fruition, and that is to give our victims here in Pennsylvania a voice. And it has been a drastic change when I got to meet our chairman of the Parole Board and realized that he absolutely supports the concept and needs legislation to support the concept moving forward. This day, today in Pennsylvania, is a day when so many come united across party lines, across philosophical boundaries, and stick up for one thing, and that's our victims here in Pennsylvania. And I'm very proud to be the author, but I'm very proud to have a great team assembled to move this legislation out of committee, out of the House, and over to the Senate, and hopefully to the governor's desk. This bill will run out of committee Tuesday, the Judiciary Committee, and will be ready for a floor vote the following week. Our House rules will not allow it to be voted next Wednesday. But this bill is on the fast track. Our entire leadership team, from the Speaker all the way down to yours truly, is on board with this bill as co-sponsors, and we look forward to its great streamlined path to send it over to the Senate. Obviously, this addresses the Crime Victims Act portion, and it addresses the victims' rights section of that act, and essentially gives our victims the right to present their statement of updated testimony or information to the parole board member on the case, where before it was transmitted via paper file or in some cases electronically. We now know that the same right that the criminal has had all along is now going to be given to our victims. So without further ado, I think you've all heard me enough on this issue, and we're very confident that this legislation is going to proceed ahead, but I do want to have a few people speak on it. And our first one is going to be my colleague, Representative Todd Stevens, a former prosecutor here in this office, in the District Attorney's Office, a member of the Judiciary Committee, and a great ally on parole issues. Todd? You go that way.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for your leadership on this particular issue. This bill is so important. It will reaffirm the legislature's commitment to ensuring that our criminal justice system delivers justice for our victims. Our law books are chock full of laws to protect defendants' rights, and this bill reaffirms our commitment that victims have rights, and their voice must be heard and considered before any parole actions are taken. So I'm pleased to join as the second co-sponsor on this bill, and I look forward to working in the Judiciary Committee and working with my colleagues to get it passed quickly and moving it on to the governor's desk for a signature ultimately. Thanks again.
Thanks, Todd. And next, our great District Attorney, Risa Furman.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you all so much for coming here. Out of tragedy comes something good. And that's what victims often hope, and that's what we often hope as prosecutors, that out of the tragedies we see every day, something good will come. That's a conversation I had many times with Gary Gregory, especially in his trying to fight for his sister, for her memory, and to see that justice was done for victims. And out of the tragic, horrific death of Ellen Gregory Robb, we are seeing something very positive happen. I think it is very true that we all know what is right and the way systems should work, but it is often a tragedy that befalls us, that causes us to move forward, that propels us to do the right thing as a system. And that is exactly what has happened here. When Gary Gregory and I started a few months ago this effort to keep Raphael Robb in jail, we were focused on one case and justice in that case, justice for his family. And we had no idea that that would lead us here today, but how appropriate that we are here today. Because in the fight for justice for Ellen Robb's family, we found that victims across Pennsylvania were not being given their rights. Their voices were not being heard. They were not being really heard. And that will change when this legislation is passed and signed into law. There is nothing more important than the voices of our victims being heard by our system, making sure that we protect them and that we hear them, particularly before we release criminals back into society. So Representative Vereb and your colleagues, I thank you so much for taking on this fight. When Gary and I first started, we were standing alone, and very quickly we were surrounded by so many others. And to all of those who are here today, from our Attorney General to Chairman Pottinger from the Parole Board, to our police chiefs and to all of the victims advocates who are here, we would not be this successful if you had not joined in the fight, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your presence and your support and your work on behalf of victims in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Our Attorney General, Kathleen Kane.
Thank you.
Thank you, General.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to commend everyone who has worked so hard on this bill for, first of all, listening to Gary's story about his sister and the problems that they had in making her voice heard and taking action to it. They worked together, they worked in unison, they worked in a nonpartisan way, and they just got it done. So I commend everyone for that. I am here representing the Office of Attorney General because we wake up every morning with the mantra of justice for all, and justice has no expiration date. What this bill does is it shows that the weight of a victim's testimony is heavy, and it doesn't stop at any certain point in time in our judicial system. It carries through until justice has been achieved and everyone goes home knowing with the fact that justice has been served. So we commend everyone who has been working on it. We are very happy to be a part of it and to be a supporter of this bill. I recommend that everyone thank their representatives and their district attorney for working so hard. And I also want to just say a special thank you to Gary, who, you know, I have brothers, and he reminds me a lot of my brothers when he never lets the voice of his sister be quieted. So thank you.
Our next speaker, certainly, I'm so honored that he's here. Our chairman of our Parole Board, Mike Pottinger, who is just wide open to these changes, already working to in anticipation for this bill to pass, to give our victims a voice, and a major advocate. 1 year into it, and we're making him a veteran already. Chairman?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. First of all, I just want to say thank you. And thank you for putting this together today. I want to thank everyone for coming today. The board believes in the victim's right, especially in the voice in the parole process. And we support the in-person victim testimony. For the past 7 months, we've been working with Carol Lavery, the Office of Victim Advocate, to determine how to implement this process. Most recently, we began using digital recorders, where in the past, when the victims went in to testify to a hearing examiners, it was an oral testimony that was written. Now we have the availability through our digital recorders to actually hear the voices of the victim for more of an impact. In addition, we have created an internal work group between the board and the Office of Victim Advocate in exploring the development on the process of how to get the victims for in-person testimony for the board. Understanding one thing that I have learned is the Commonwealth is big. And one thing that we've been exploring is how we have to implement that process, the challenges that we will face, not only for the victims, but for the board. So we are working through our logistical issues through a careful and thoughtful process that we will hopefully have this process in place by September of this year following legislation. So I want to commend the representative, the district attorney's office, and I appreciate the Attorney General being here today, and Carol Lavery, who has been a supporter and helping me through this process, and along with my board members as we move it forward. So thank you again for today.
And from the Office of Victim Advocate, Carol Lavery.
I just want to say a very few words. I've been part of what has been the victims movement since the 1970s. An awful lot of people say, well, is that movement dead? Is it over? Well, it isn't over. And this is exactly today is an example of how we know it is not over. The Crime Victims Act was founded in activism by victims. This significant change that allows victims to come before a deciding body which has such a significant impact on their future. Because parole isn't just about the offender. We know that. Parole is so much about victims. And this act, this change, will make such a significant difference. All I can say is thank you to everybody in this room who has made this happen and is keeping this one forward. And the victim movement is not dead. The Gregory family is such a big part of the evidence that it is moving and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth Sturman from the Laurel House.
Thank you. It's an honor to be asked to speak very briefly on behalf of the victims of our region and our county. I would first like to thank Representative Vereb for leading this, and certainly District Attorney Risa Furman for her tireless advocacy for justice for the victims in this county. At Laurel House is a domestic violence agency. We work closely with Victim Services, which is another victim agency in our county. And between the two different organizations, we support so many families who have lost loved ones to homicide, unfortunately. And this legislation will mean so much to those surviving family members and to all the victims that we work with every year. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And Gary.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, what a great day. This is very, very exciting. As a starting point, I want to thank, on behalf of my sister, her family, friends, all the victims of domestic violence and crimes, gratitude. First and foremost to Michael Vereb. His leadership and passion to bring forward this legislation is phenomenal. And he's been supported by Todd Stevens, who jumped in on this battle early on. We are grateful for the support of Governor Corbett, who saw the value and importance of these efforts early on. And it's evidenced by the attendance of the Attorney General Kane. Thank you for being here. We also want to thank Chairman Pottinger, who saw this actually early on in his tenure, the need to take on this important initiative, and it's evidenced by his support and leadership and vision to make this become a reality. I'd also like to thank Carol Lavery from the Office of Victim Advocate. Excuse me. Her work throughout this process for our family has been phenomenal. And the leadership that they do on a daily basis with victims will carry forward with the implementation of this legislation. And last but not least, not only do I thank the members of the domestic violence community, but the untiring efforts of Risa Furman, who's been there throughout for the family. Now, what does this all mean? This means a direct voice for victims and their families. This is of incredible importance because what it does is allow the decision-making process, the parole board, to get real insights, direct voice, as Michael Vereb stated, from the family, from the victims, so that they can make an educated decision and clearly see the importance, the weight, and the value of the victim's feedback. And with that, it will make a difference. So we've turned this tragedy, we believe, into what will be a triumph, as Risa said, and it will happen because of all of those in this room today. Fantastic. It's a momentous day for the Commonwealth, and our gratitude is significant. Thank you.
Before we open up the questions, the Senate cannot co-sponsor a House bill, so I want to thank Senator Leach, who certainly wanted to be here. This is his district that this occurred in. Representative Briggs, who cannot be here, he is number 3 on the bill, very supportive of this legislation. Senator Rafferty, and certainly Senator Lisa Baker, who I found out yesterday, is a major advocate for this issue. And we look forward to working with all of these different individuals and groups to move the legislation ahead. Lastly, I just might add, all of your good work as the press has given Mr. Robb some great reading in the prison. So I want to thank you. And I want Mr. Robb to also know that his manipulation is over and that we're going to have this bill signed into law. And he's going to be the first one to have their victims appear in front of this board if we have anything to do with it. So we hope to give him good reading, and we hope to have this legislation signed into law as a special dedication to not only Ellen Gregory Robb, but to all of our victims in Pennsylvania, to give them that voice. So that was safe, wasn't it?
I wasn't sure where you were going.
She never
I might
is.
have cleared my throat.
She never
I'm
is.
sure nobody noticed that.
We are going to open up to questions related to House Bill 492.
Is there any companion state legislation moving forward, or Senate legislation moving forward right now?
Senator Baker is, I believe, going to work on legislation. She has been working on an issue with a victim up in her area, which I just found out yesterday. So we know that we have a fighter in the Senate, in Senator Baker. Understand that Senator Rafferty is vice chair of the Judiciary. Senator Greenleaf is chair of the Judiciary. That's the first step when it gets over to the Senate. Make no mistake, this will be in the Senate as soon as our House rules allow it to be. It has overwhelming support.
Mike, for Gary, I guess, could answer this because he just went through the process. What was it like for you to be able to appear before the board in person, and how do you believe that had an impact more so on the board than just words on a paper?
Well, to be clear, according to the guidelines that exist today, while we had the great opportunity to meet with the chairman, it wasn't an opportunity to present our feelings, our thoughts, our view on the continued incarceration of Raphael Robb for the heinous murder killing that he committed. It was an opportunity to review the process. And clearly the process has a flaw today, and that's why this legislation is so critical. The process does not allow the direct voice of the victim or their families to the parole board. And that is the intent, the direction, and ultimately will be the positive outcome, a very positive outcome of the legislation.
So then victim advocates, under this law, will they be allowed to go into the room with the families? I mean, I imagine that would be a daunting experience for families to go in and talk to a parole board.
Yes.
I don't know if I can step up. Can I step up for a
Sure,
second?
please.
Carol, in case you want to, I'll just say this, is that's the intent. We just got back, we went to New York on Friday, to the state of New York, who does in-person interviews with board members. So we started to feel their process and how they work their process. As I said earlier, we've been working on this for about 7 months now, and we're just trying to continue to work out some of the logistical issues. This morning, I talked to Teresa, and she also provided some additional information about some other issues about victims in the, whether it's the incident offense or a prior offense. So those are the things that we continue to work at. But we look at having Office of Victim Advocate be a part of the whole process along with the victims.
We are very much committed in partnership with the board to creating a process that is, we keep using the word process, which is very bureaucratic, but it's all about providing support and making this a very positive experience for victims. Victims come before judges, they get to speak. That is generally a positive experience. They work with the local victim services, particularly those out of the DA's offices when they do that. That's something we hope to have, and we're working on having the exact same type of opportunity in front of the Parole Board, where they are supported, where they can bring people with them, when they can walk away and say, I may not get what I want, but I got to say what I needed to say, and I feel good about it.
Anything else?
So just to be clear how the law is going to change, from what I'm reading here, they're currently permitted to, but the board is not required to hear from the families in person. Kind of explain exactly what the process is now and how that would change.
Right now, the process is there's no face-to-face testimony permitted to be submitted by our victims or their representatives.
So they typically just can give written input, or I mean, I assume the family has some, victim's family has some sort of input.
It's on. The testimony is submitted in writing currently. That's what happened not only in the pre-parole hearings, but also in the last one when Mr. Robb was paroled for a very short period of time. There was written testimony was provided not only by the judge but by the victim. So it's all in writing at this point.
Don't a lot of other states allow people to do this?
Well, a lot of other states do a lot of other things. I mean, they're obviously looking forward on how they can implement this and want to do it from a policy perspective. Our legislation here is going to make it law. We look to other states sometimes for leading, and then we have to look at our unique circumstances that we deal with in our system here in Pennsylvania. So, yes, they may, yes, they do, and yes, Pennsylvania will.
Questions. Mike, have you introduced this yet?
I believe it's introduced now, yes.
And then secondly, I mean, one of the things that people had said was the tricky part of this was figuring out who among victims or families could go in without inundating the board with thousands of meetings, How are you going to deal with that aspect?
Well, I'm going to get the legislation done. Carol, can I ask you to come up because there's obviously a process. It's not a free-for-all.
Yes. The initial process will be any registered victim with the Office of Victim Advocate will have the availability, if they so choose to have their voice heard in front of the board, a board or board member. So that's the initial. That's our initial plan as we move forward.
We don't know exactly how many victims will want to take part in that process. Right now, there are we do approximately anywhere from between 600 to 1,000 notifications to victims offering them the opportunity to provide input to the board, which comes, again, mostly in written form. Although we do have in Pennsylvania the widest variety of ways for victims to access the board. But what we don't have is that big issue to see them face to face, between letters, between speaking to our staff, between putting things on in electronic form, to submitting videos, or even to speaking to hearing examiners. But those hearing examiners are not the people who make the decisions. So they have opportunities, but this is the big elephant in the room in terms of that. But the numbers, we are not sure. Right now, we have about 80 to 90 victims who come before hearing examiners every month. Many victims don't want to do that because their words are then summarized. And they don't want summaries. They want their words to be heard. So this process, we're looking at other states. We're assuming we're going to end up in actually very small numbers because we also hear from so many victims that they don't want to do this because they would feel intimidated. We're expecting in around 10 to 20 per month. We'll see what happens, and the board is committed. I do want to say one thing. When Mike Potiker came into the office about a year ago, at our very first meeting, he said to me, I want to make sure that we get this implemented. I know it's been on your wish list for a very long time. Let's try and make this happen. I know there's legislation out there, but let's get working on it and talking about it. And it's legislation like this that will ensure that this happens and it continues forever and doesn't go backwards.
That's 600 to 1,000 notifications. Is that monthly?
Yes.
So why hasn't this been implemented before?
This mic or this mic? No, I'm just kidding.
Either one of you.
I can't speak about why or why not from before. All we are trying to do right now is look from today forward and how we can implement the process that is fair to the victims, that they have their voice in the parole process.
I'm just curious, was there some reason before that this wasn't implemented? Was there a concern that it might overwhelm the parole board or something else?
Yeah.
How about we just do this? We're moving forward. This case, as the general said and as the chairman said before our get-together here, is sort of like a leaping board. This case has expressed the urgency and brought a face again to our victims. So what has happened in the past, obviously we really can't do much about it. I mean, a month and a half ago I was sending laser beam letters to the chairman, and now he's not only on board, he helped draft the legislation, as did our Office of Victim Advocate, as did our Attorney General's office and her part of protecting the testimony under our right to know law. So we're moving forward. We can't really figure out exactly what happened. As we all understand, there's a parole code, there's a Crime Victims Act, and they're not always consistent. So we're consistent with each other, that is. So we're moving forward, and we look forward to not worrying about what happened in the past, because all we can really do is get it done, get it signed, and worry about our victims of the future.
Mike, can I make one more comment?
Sure
please?
can.
One thing that is important to note, while the numbers, as Carol Avery had just mentioned, may not be overwhelming, what's really important here is the direct voice on those cases that require specific attention. A 5 to 10 year sentence for a killing is not the same as 5 to 10 years for shoplifting or breaking and entering. So on these violent crimes, having victims and their families step forward is monumental. And it's what will allow the judicial system and the parole board to be able to segment more effectively 5 to 10 years for a criminal offense to 5 to 10 years for a heinous, outrageous criminal offense. And that's where the victim's voice will be most powerful. And as Reese has educated me, there is a difference. It's not just 5 to 10 for all. And in these cases, where it matters is where the parole board will now have the opportunity to make a more educated, a more informed, and a more robust decision instead of viewing all cases the same. I think that's critical, and that's the breakthrough here that all of these people have joined to make happen.
But Mike, to clarify that, this was all levels of crime? Because we're talking about a specific case here, but will it be sexual predators, that sort of thing? Will it be all?
The way the legislation is being submitted today, yes, all on parole. I want to thank Representative, just 3 big accolades, Tim. You did make it. Thank you so very much for being here. And that's certainly, we're talking about his district, and we were going to be out at the gazebo, but scheduling and weather changed that. So, anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.